The afternoon sun beat down on my parents' sprawling lawn in Savannah, Georgia. I stood near the edge of the patio gripping a sweating glass of iced tea. My name is Amity Anderson. I am 33 years old. I am an NICU nurse who spends 14 hours a day fighting for premature babies to take their next breath. But my own body could not do the one thing I wanted most. 3 failed IVF cycles had hollowed me out. The grief sat heavy in my chest every single day. Today was my parents' 40th anniversary party. 50 guests milled around the catered buffet. Most of them were my mother Beverly and her country club friends. The clinking of crystal and polite southern murmurs filled the humid air. I watched from a distance as my older sister Harper walked toward table 1. Harper had recently finalized her divorce. It was a messy situation that my mother smoothed over by quietly paying off $40,000 of Harper credit card debt. Harper wore a tight white cocktail dress today. That was a color my mother explicitly forbade anyone else from wearing. My husband Cole sat at table 1. He wore a dark suit and his jaw was set in a hard line. Harper reached his chair holding a thick place card. She leaned over his shoulder and placed it squarely on his plate. I could read the elegant script from 10 feet away. Save me a seat forever. Before Cole could move, Harper laughed loud enough to turn heads and lowered herself right onto his lap. A ripple of amusement moved through the guests. Beverly stepped to the center of the patio. She tapped a silver spoon against her champagne flute. The yard quieted down. "To 40 years of family," Beverly announced. Her voice carried over the manicured hedges. She turned her gaze toward Cole and Harper. She offered a warm smile. "And look at these two. They actually look better together." The guests laughed louder. Beverly raised her glass higher. Her eyes locked directly onto mine. Amity is too busy pumping hormones into her empty body to ever give Cole a real child anyway. The laughter sputtered and died. 3 women near the buffet lowered their glasses and looked at the ground. My chest tightened. I could not pull air into my lungs. My hands shook so hard, the iced tea splashed over the rim of my glass and stained my navy dress. Cole did not move. For 3 agonizing seconds, he remained still beneath my sister. I thought I had lost everything. Then gravity did its job. Cole stood up. He did not offer a hand. He just rose and let Harper slide off his lap. She tumbled onto the grass with a sharp yelp. He ignored her. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He looked straight at my mother and spoke a single sentence that shattered the silence. 17 voicemails, Beverly. He said it loud and clear. And you coached the last 4. What none of the country club friends knew was that this was not a spontaneous argument. This was a carefully laid trap. But to understand how my sister ended up in the dirt and how my mother lost her kingdom in a single afternoon, we have to go back 6 months. Before I reveal exactly how this sabotage started, I have a question for you. What is your age, and have you ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life to survive? Let me know in the comments below. Welcome to Grape Vengeance. If you want stories where the truth always wins, make sure to subscribe right now. Now let me take you back to 6 months ago, when the nightmare began. 6 months before the anniversary party, my life was a relentless cycle of exhaustion and grief. I worked 14-hour shifts at the local hospital. Every morning, I washed my hands with harsh antibacterial soap until the skin on my knuckles cracked and bled. I walked into the neonatal intensive care unit and spent my day keeping fragile lungs breathing. I held premature babies against my chest to regulate their tiny heart rates. I watched exhausted mothers cry tears of pure joy when their children finally opened their eyes. I gave these families the comfort my own body refused to give me. When my shift ended, I would sit in my car in the hospital parking garage and stare at the steering wheel. I traced the worn leather grain with my thumb and tried to summon the energy to drive home. My house was quiet. Too quiet. My husband Cole taught high school American history and coached the junior varsity football team. He spent his days shaping teenagers into young men. He ran drills in the hot Georgia sun and brought home a modest paycheck. We were two people who spent our lives caring for other families while our own dreams slipped through our fingers. We had drained our savings account to nothing. $82,000 had gone to the Georgia Fertility Institute. 3 cycles, 3 negative tests. 3 times I sat on the cold bathroom tile and wrapped my arms around my knees, trying to breathe through the heartbreak. Cole never complained about the money. He woke up at 4 in the morning to grade history essays, just so he could spend his evenings sitting on the couch with me. He brewed my coffee before dawn. He packed my lunches in brown paper bags. He held my hand during the endless blood draws. But the financial strain hovered over our roof like a dark thundercloud. While Cole and I counted every penny to afford my next hormone injection, my mother lived in a different reality. Beverly treated her wealth like a weapon. She wielded her checkbook to control everyone around her. Mostly, she used it to shield my older sister, Harper, from the consequences of her own choices. Harper was the golden child. She always had been. If Harper wanted piano lessons growing up, I received a used keyboard from a neighborhood yard sale. If Harper wanted a new car for college graduation, I received a bus schedule. Harper had recently gone through a divorce. Her ex-husband finally grew tired of her endless spending habits and walked out the front door. He left her with a stack of credit card bills and 2 energetic sons. Instead of letting Harper learn a lesson, Beverly swooped in to save the day. My mother wrote a check for $40,000 to clear the debt in a single afternoon. She bought Harper a new luxury SUV so she would not look desperate pulling into the country club parking lot. She refurnished Harper's entire living room because the old sofa held bad memories. Beverly never asked Harper to get a job or balance a budget. Instead, she turned her attention to me. Because I earned a good salary as a specialized nurse, Beverly decided I owed my sister a debt. She constantly demanded I cover minor expenses for Harper. A grocery bill here, a utility payment there. She claimed it was my duty as a sister to step up while Harper healed from her emotional trauma. The real breaking point happened during a Sunday dinner at my mother's estate. It was a humid evening in late September. We sat around the long mahogany dining table. The crystal chandelier cast sharp shadows against the walls. Harper sat across from me, twirling a piece of roasted asparagus with her silver fork. Her 2 boys played video games in the next room. Their laughter echoed down the hallway, reminding me of everything I did not have. Beverly took a slow sip of her Chardonnay and looked at me across the table. "Amity, dear," she said, "Harper has been under so much stress lately with the divorce negotiations. She needs a change of scenery. She was looking at a spa resort in Sedona for a week. I think you should cover the flight and the hotel. It would be a nice gesture from you and Cole." I set my fork down on my plate. I looked at my mother. The request was not a question. It was a royal decree. My chest tightened. I thought about the stack of medical bills sitting on my kitchen counter. I thought about the extra overnight shifts I picked up just to afford the co-pays for my fertility medications. I thought about Cole wearing the same winter coat for 5 years because we needed the money for treatments. "Mom, I cannot pay for a spa vacation," I said. My voice remained level. "Cole and I have our own expenses right now." Beverly lowered her wine glass. Her perfect smile vanished. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harper stopped twirling her asparagus and looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Your own expenses?" Beverly repeated. The words dripped from her mouth like poison. "You mean the endless clinic visits? You are throwing away a fortune, Amity. For what?" I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I glanced at Cole. He was gripping his cloth napkin under the table. His knuckles were turning white. "Harper gave me 2 beautiful, healthy grandsons without a second thought," Beverly continued. She gestured toward the hallway where the boys were playing. "She did it naturally. She did what a woman is supposed to do. She created life. And look at her. She is radiant." My mother turned her cold gaze toward Cole. She did not raise her voice, but the cruelty in her tone was sharp enough to draw blood. "Cole works so hard all day," Beverly said. "He coaches those boys on the football field. He deserves to come home to a real family, not a depressingly quiet house. He needs a warm environment. She tilted her head and studied my husband. A man can only wait so long before he realizes he deserves a complete woman, someone who can actually give him what he needs instead of draining his bank account. The air vanished from my lungs. The insult was a physical blow to my stomach. She was telling my husband to leave me. She was telling him right to my face that I was defective and that he should cut his losses. She wanted him to view our marriage as a bad investment. She wanted him to look at Harper as the better option. I waited for Cole to speak. I waited for him to stand up and defend me. I waited for him to slam his fist on the mahogany table and tell her she crossed a sacred line. Cole just looked at Beverly. His face was a mask of stone. He did not say a single word. He placed his napkin on his plate and took a slow, measured breath. I absorbed the insult. I swallowed the thick lump in my throat and looked down at my plate. I chose to keep the peace because fighting Beverly was like fighting a hurricane. You only end up drowning. I told myself Cole was just avoiding a screaming match. I told myself he was being mature by ignoring the bait. But that night, on the drive home, the silence inside our car felt heavy. Cole did not turn on the radio. He kept his eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. The streetlights flickered across his face. I asked him what he was thinking about. He shook his head and kept his hands on the steering wheel. Just grading history papers, he lied. I believed him. I trusted the man I married. I thought we were a team facing the storm together. But a few days later, I went down to the basement to switch the laundry. I picked up his favorite pair of denim jeans to toss them into the washing machine. I checked the pockets so I would not ruin anything in the wash. My fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper hidden deep inside the denim. I pulled it out and smoothed it over the metal lid of the washer. It was a receipt. I did not know it then, but that small piece of paper was the first clue that my husband was hiding a huge secret from me. The date printed on the receipt aligned perfectly with Harper's last visit to our house, and the name printed at the top belonged to a place Cole had no business contacting on his own. I stood in the dim light of the basement laundry room. The concrete floor sent a chill through my socks, but I hardly noticed. My focus was locked on the crumpled piece of paper I had just pulled from the pocket of Cole denim jeans. I smoothed the wrinkled edges against the cool metal lid of the washing machine. The faint smell of laundry detergent mixed with the metallic scent of old pipes. I leaned closer to the single overhead bulb to read the faded ink. The logo at the top of the page made my heart skip a beat. Georgia Fertility Institute. It was the clinic where we had spent our life savings. It was the place where my dreams of becoming a mother had died 3 separate times. My eyes scanned the text below the logo. It was a formal medical records request. Someone had paid $35 in cash to pull a very specific set of documents. I traced the printed words with my index finger. The request asked for the detailed chain of custody logs for my 3rd IVF cycle. It demanded the precise timestamps of the embryology lab activities on the day of my final embryo transfer. I moved my gaze to the bottom of the page. The signature scrawled on the dotted line belonged to my husband. Cole had signed this form behind my back. A cold dread pooled in my stomach. Why was Cole investigating the darkest moment of my life? My 3rd cycle was the one that broke me. We had managed to create one perfect embryo. The doctors were optimistic. We transferred it on a quiet Tuesday morning. 10 days later, the blood test came back negative. I had sobbed on the bathroom floor until I threw up. Cole had sat beside me and held my hair. He told me we would survive it. He told me my worth was not tied to my ability to carry a child. Yet here was proof that he was digging into the medical files of that exact failure. I checked the date stamped by the clinic receptionist in the top right corner, October 12th. I stared at those 2 numbers until they blurred. October 12th was a Tuesday. I had been working a grueling 12-hour shift in the neonatal intensive care unit that day. I distinctly remembered that specific Tuesday for another reason. It was the day my sister Harper paid a surprise visit to our house. When I had dragged myself through the front door that evening, the house smelled like expensive jasmine perfume. It was the signature scent Beverly bought for Harper every Christmas. Cole was sitting in the kitchen grading papers. He seemed tense. He told me Harper had dropped by to deliver a baked ziti from our mother. He claimed she only stayed for 15 minutes. But the heavy scent of jasmine lingered in our living room for hours. Why did Cole drive to the fertility clinic to request my private medical logs on the exact same afternoon my sister visited our home while I was at work? I folded the receipt back into a small square. My hands trembled. Cole and I had built our marriage on total honesty. When we met 7 years ago, he was a substitute teacher driving a beat-up sedan. I was fresh out of nursing school. We bonded over our shared desire to build a quiet, drama-free life. We never kept secrets. If we had a bad day, we talked about it over cheap takeout on the living room floor. But over the past few weeks, that transparent man had vanished. The distance between us had started slowly. At first, I blamed it on the stress of the football season. Cole was spending more time running evening practices. But the subtle changes became impossible to ignore. He started taking phone calls on the back porch. I would watch him through the kitchen window. He would pace back and forth across the wooden deck with the phone pressed tight to his ear. His voice was always lowered to a hushed whisper. If I slid the glass door open to ask if he wanted dinner, he would immediately end the call and slip the phone into his pocket. Then came the laptop. Cole usually left his computer open on the coffee table. Lately, he guarded it like a bank vault. 2 nights ago, I walked into the bedroom after finishing a late shift. Cole was sitting propped up against the pillows, typing furiously. The moment I turned the doorknob, he snapped the laptop shut. The loud click echoed in the quiet room. He offered me a tight smile and asked about my patience. He never mentioned what he was working on. Standing next to the washing machine, I felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. My mind raced through the worst possible scenarios. Was Beverly right? Had my mother's cruel words at the dining room table finally planted a seed in his mind? She told him he deserved a complete woman. She told him he was wasting his hard-earned money on my broken body. Was my husband building a legal case for divorce? I knew from my friends at the hospital that medical records were often subpoenaed during nasty separations. If Cole wanted to prove that our financial ruin was entirely my fault, pulling the fertility clinic logs would be the first step. Maybe he wanted to show a judge that he had poured $82,000 into a lost cause. Maybe he was looking for a way to leave me without looking like the bad guy. The thought felt like a knife twisting in my ribs. I had already lost my chance to be a mother. I could not survive losing the only person who made this house feel like a home. If Cole left me, I would have nothing but the suffocating pity of my mother and the smug triumph of my sister. I held the folded receipt over the trash can. I wanted to throw it away. I wanted to march upstairs and demand an explanation. I wanted to scream until my throat burned. But I stopped myself. If I confronted him right now, he could easily lie. He could say he was just checking the billing statements. He could invent a story about tax deductions. If he was truly planning to leave me, showing my hand would only give him the advantage. I needed to know the truth before I opened my mouth. I had survived 3 failed pregnancies and a lifetime of emotional abuse from my own mother. I knew how to endure pain in silence. I carefully slipped the folded receipt back into the pocket of his denim jeans. I threw the pants into the washing machine and poured the detergent. I watched the water fill the drum, washing away any trace that I had found his secret. I carried the empty plastic laundry basket up the wooden stairs. Every step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the living room, Cole was sitting on the couch. He was watching a football game on the television. He looked over his shoulder and smiled at me. It was the same warm, familiar smile that made me fall in love with him years ago. "Hey you," he said softly. "Come sit with me." I forced the corners of my mouth to lift. I walked over and sat beside him. He draped his arm around my shoulders and pulled me close. I rested my head against his chest. I could hear his heartbeat steady and calm beneath his cotton shirt. To anyone looking through the window, we were the perfect, loving couple, enjoying a quiet evening at home. But as I sat there, listening to the cheers coming from the television broadcast, my mind was spiraling. I was sharing a couch with a stranger. The man holding me was keeping a secret that could destroy my entire life. The seed of doubt had taken root deep in my mind. I decided I would watch his every move. I would pay attention to every text message he received. I would track every sudden trip to the back porch. I was not going to be the naive wife blindsided by divorce papers. I did not realize that the situation was about to become far worse than a simple divorce. I thought I was losing my husband to a legal strategy. I had no idea that my own family was actively orchestrating my replacement. The very next day, my mother would escalate her campaign. Beverly summoned us for her mandatory Sunday dinner, and this time she would cross a line that would force me to question not just my husband's loyalty, but his basic humanity. Harper was waiting for us, and the game my mother was playing was about to become sickeningly physical. The summons arrived every Thursday morning like clockwork. My mother demanded our presence for Sunday dinner at her Savannah estate. These gatherings were never casual family meals filled with laughter and warmth. They were highly orchestrated performances designed to display her power. Beverly dictated the menu, the dress code, and most importantly, the seating chart. Skipping a Sunday dinner was considered an unforgivable offense in our family. If I tried to claim exhaustion from a long hospital shift, my mother would immediately call Cole and lay on a heavy guilt trip. She would say I was neglecting my marital duties by refusing to socialize and keeping my husband locked away in a depressing house. To keep the peace, we always went. I dreaded walking through those heavy mahogany front doors. The air inside the house always felt thick. Beverly employed a housekeeper to keep the hardwood floors polished and the sterling silver shining, but the atmosphere remained suffocating. I felt like a trespasser in my own childhood home. The tension wrapped around my throat the moment I stepped onto the front porch. The first week I noticed the shift in her seating arrangement. I tried to convince myself it was just a strange oversight. My mother always used heavy cardstock place cards with gold foil lettering. She positioned me at the far end of the long dining table next to my quiet father. She placed Cole at the opposite end, right next to her own chair. And she placed my sister Harper directly on his left side. I sat down and unfolded my stiff cloth napkin. I looked across the expanse of the table. Harper was leaning into Cole. She wore a silk emerald blouse that draped low across her chest. As the soup course arrived, I caught the heavy scent of jasmine wafting down the table. It was the same expensive perfume my mother wore to her country club luncheons. Harper had drenched herself in the floral scent. Halfway through the meal, Harper decided she needed the salt shaker. The silver shaker rested near Cole's right hand. Instead of asking him to pass it, Harper leaned her entire body across his chair. She stretched her arm out slowly, her chest dragged deliberately across my husband's shoulder. She took her time retrieving the salt. She let her arm linger against his dark suit jacket before pulling back with a soft, practiced giggle. I gripped my spoon so tight, my knuckles ached. I stared directly at Cole. I waited for him to lean away. I expected him to shift his chair or offer a polite but firm physical correction to reestablish his personal space. He did nothing. His expression remained entirely blank. He cut a piece of his steak and took a bite, as if my sister had not just pressed her body against him in front of our entire family. The second Sunday dinner played out exactly the same way. When we arrived, I tried to swap my place card with my father's. I wanted to sit closer to my husband, to break the physical proximity between him and my sister. Beverly swooped in immediately. She snatched the card from my hand and placed it back at the far end of the table. "Amity, dear, you look exhausted," she said loud enough for the room to hear. "Those hospital shifts are draining the life right out of you. You need space to breathe. Let Cole enjoy a lively conversation down here. You can just relax in the quiet." I was banished to the silent end of the room again. I spent the next 2 hours watching my sister perform. Harper laughed at every single comment Cole made. She poured his red wine before his crystal glass was even empty. She touched his forearm when she emphasized a point during a story about her week. Every time her manicured fingers grazed his sleeve, my heart hammered against my ribs. I felt a sickening mixture of rage and terror. Cole was a fiercely loyal man. He was the kind of husband who always shut down inappropriate behavior from other women. Yet he sat there, enduring Harper's constant physical boundary crossing without a single word of protest. His silence felt like a deep, agonizing betrayal. By the third consecutive Sunday, the tension inside my chest threatened to snap my ribs. The evening started like the others. Harper sat on Cole's left. She leaned in close to whisper a joke into his ear. He gave a short nod, but kept his face neutral. The main course was a heavy pot roast with roasted carrots. I barely touched my food. I pushed the vegetables around my plate and tried to focus on my breathing. Then my napkin slipped off my lap. I bent down to retrieve the white cloth from the hardwood floor. Underneath the long dining table, the view was clear. I saw Harper's high heel resting near Cole's leather shoe, and I saw her hand. Harper had slipped her left hand off the table. Her fingers were resting casually on Cole's thigh, just above his knee. She was gently tracing small circles on his dark trousers. My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. I grabbed my napkin and bolted upright in my chair. The blood rushed to my ears, drowning out the background music playing from the corner speakers. I looked straight at Harper. She was sipping her red wine with a relaxed, innocent smile on her face. Then I looked at Cole. He was chewing his food, staring straight ahead at the dining room wall. He did not push her hand away. He did not flinch. He did not react at all. I shifted my gaze to the head of the table. Beverly was watching me. She took a slow sip from her crystal goblet. The corners of her mouth twitched upward into a satisfied, smug smirk. She knew I saw it. She knew exactly what was happening under her table, because she had designed the seating chart to make it happen. Beverly set her glass down and sighed happily. "It is so wonderful having a full table," she announced to the room. She directed her attention to my husband. "Cole, you work such long hours at that high school. Dealing with teenagers all day must be exhausting for a man like you. You really need a fun, stress-free environment to come home to. Everyone needs a place where they can just relax and be appreciated. Do you not agree?" Cole wiped his mouth with his napkin. He looked directly at my mother. "I agree, Beverly," he said. His voice was flat and hollow, unreadable. He did not look at me. He did not move away from my sister. He just sat there, letting Harper stake her physical claim on him while my mother cheered her on. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of ringing ears and shallow breaths. I could not taste the dessert my father served. I could not hear the conversation buzzing around me. The walls of the dining room felt like they were shrinking, closing in to crush me. The man I had loved for 7 years was sitting at the other end of the table, letting my sister touch his leg. The man who held my hand through endless clinic visits and devastating miscarriages was allowing another woman to invade our marriage. And my mother was orchestrating the entire nightmare with a smile on her face. I left the dinner feeling entirely isolated. When we walked out to the car, the humid Georgia night air provided no relief for my burning lungs. We climbed into the front seats. Cole started the engine. I stared out the passenger window, watching the neighborhood streetlights bleed into the darkness. I wanted to scream at him until my throat went raw. I wanted to demand an explanation for the fertility clinic receipt hidden in his pocket and the hand resting on his knee. I wanted to ask him if he was trading me in for a younger model that was not broken. But the paralyzing fear kept my mouth shut. If I asked the question, I had to be prepared for the answer. If Cole admitted he was leaving me for Harper, I would shatter into a million pieces and I would never put myself back together. The secret clinic receipt, the private phone calls on the back deck, the unresponsiveness at the dinner table. The evidence was piling up into a mountain I could no longer ignore. My husband was slipping away, and my own flesh and blood was holding the door wide open for him. We pulled into our driveway in total silence. Cole turned off the ignition and walked straight upstairs to his small office to grade papers. I stayed down in the dark kitchen. I leaned against the granite counter and squeezed my eyes shut. I was losing my mind. I needed solid, undeniable proof before I tore my marriage apart and gave my mother the victory she craved. I needed to know exactly what Cole was hiding behind his blank stares. I would get my answer much sooner than I expected. That very same night, the quiet darkness of our house would be broken. A single glowing screen on the kitchen island would reveal a name that sent ice straight through my veins. The mystery of his betrayal was about to take a terrifying new turn. I thought I was losing my husband to a simple affair. I was not prepared for a full-blown conspiracy. That night I lay awake in our quiet bedroom. Cole was fast asleep beside me. His breathing was deep and rhythmic. The physical distance between us on the mattress felt like a massive canyon. The images from the dining room kept replaying in my mind. Harper resting her hand on his thigh, Beverly smiling from the head of the table, Cole staring blankly at the wall. The betrayal gnawed at my stomach until the pain became unbearable. At 2 a.m, I finally gave up on sleep. I carefully threw off the cotton blanket and stepped onto the hardwood floor. The house was entirely silent. I walked downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of cold water. I did not turn on the overhead lights. The moonlight spilling through the window provided enough visibility. I set my glass on the granite island. That was when a sudden bright light pierced the darkness. Cole had left his phone resting face up on the kitchen counter. The screen illuminated the surrounding stone. A short vibration buzzed against the hard surface. My breath caught in my throat. Who sends a text message to a high school history teacher at 2 a.m? I walked slowly toward the glowing screen. I did not want to look. I knew that looking at a spouse's phone was crossing a sacred boundary in a marriage. But Cole had already crossed a boundary by letting my sister touch him. I leaned over the counter and stared at the lock screen. The sender was saved under a single name, Renee. The message below the name was short and calculated. She is pushing the timeline. I need the documents. My stomach dropped straight into my shoes. I read the words 5 times, trying to force them to make sense. She is pushing the timeline. I need the documents. The screen faded to black, leaving me standing in the dark kitchen with a pounding heart. Who was Renee? I grabbed my work laptop from my nursing bag by the front door. I sat down on a kitchen stool and opened the web browser. The bright screen burned my tired eyes. I navigated to the county school district website. I found the public staff directory for the high school where Cole worked. My fingers trembled as I typed the name into the search bar. I checked the faculty list. I checked the administrative staff. I even checked the cafeteria workers and the substitute teacher registry. The search yielded 0 results. There was no one named Renee employed at his school. My mind began to race through every terrible possibility. Was my husband having an affair? The late-night phone calls on the back deck and the sudden need for privacy pointed directly to another woman. But the text message did not fit the pattern of a romantic relationship. People sneaking around in cheap hotel rooms do not send messages at 2 a.m. asking for documents. They do not talk about timelines. They send sloppy messages about missing each other. This message was entirely clinical. It sounded like a business transaction. I remembered the crumpled receipt I found in his denim jeans a few days earlier. The Georgia Fertility Institute. He had paid cash to request the chain of custody logs for my failed embryo transfer. How did my private medical failure connect to a woman named Renee? Why did she need documents? And who was the woman pushing the timeline? My mother had spoken about timelines during her cruel speech at the dining table. She told Cole a man could only wait so long before realizing he needed a complete woman. Beverly wanted him to move on. Was my mother the person pushing the timeline? I closed the laptop. The quiet kitchen offered no answers. I knew I could not just confront Cole. If I marched upstairs and demanded to know who Renee was, he would simply delete the message and lock his phone. He would invent a story about a parent struggling with a failing student. He would make me look crazy and paranoid. I needed to see exactly what he was doing with my own eyes. I made a firm decision right there in the dark. I had Monday off from the hospital. I was going to follow my husband. The next afternoon, the Georgia heat was absolutely stifling. I parked my unremarkable silver sedan a block away from the high school football field. I rolled down my windows to keep from suffocating in the humid air. I sat low in my seat and watched through a pair of sunglasses. At 4 o'clock, the practice whistle blew. Teenage boys in sweaty practice jerseys ran toward the locker room. Cole walked across the green turf. He looked completely normal. He looked like the decent, honorable man I married 7 years ago. The cognitive dissonance physically hurt my chest. How could the man who held me while I cried over negative pregnancy tests be plotting against me in secret? Cole climbed into his dark gray truck. He pulled out of the school parking lot. I started my engine and pulled into traffic, keeping 2 cars between us. He did not drive toward our quiet suburban neighborhood. Instead, he turned his truck toward the industrial outskirts of Savannah. We passed rows of abandoned warehouses and rusted chain-link fences. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my palms ached. We were driving into a part of town where people only went when they wanted to remain unseen. Cole signaled and pulled into the cracked asphalt lot of a dilapidated roadside diner. The neon sign above the building was broken. I parked across the street behind a large, faded billboard. I had a clear view of his truck. The diner parking lot was practically empty. A woman was standing beside a faded blue sedan. She was nervously checking her watch. She did not look like a mistress preparing for a romantic rendezvous. Her hair was pulled back into a messy, tight ponytail. She wore dark clothing that looked suspiciously like medical scrubs. She constantly looked over her shoulder, scanning the empty street. She looked terrified. Cole parked his truck and stepped out. He did not smile. He walked straight toward her. I held my breath. I waited for the physical contact. I waited for a warm embrace or a hidden kiss. I prepared my heart to shatter into a million pieces. But there was no affection between them. Cole stopped 3 feet away from the woman. His posture was rigid and intimidating. He crossed his arms over his chest. He looked like an interrogator cornering a suspect. The woman reached into a canvas tote bag resting on the hood of her car. Her hands were visibly shaking. She pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. She held it tight against her chest for a long second. She looked up at Cole with wide, fearful eyes. Cole held out his hand. He did not say a word. He just waited. The woman slowly extended her arm and handed the envelope to my husband. Cole took it. He ripped open the top flap and looked inside. He pulled out a stack of papers and flipped through the first few pages. He nodded once. His face remained entirely stoic. The woman spoke quickly. Her mouth moved in rapid, frantic sentences. She looked like she was begging him for something. Cole simply shook his head. He gave her one final, hard stare before turning his back on her entirely. He walked back to his truck and tossed the manila envelope onto the passenger seat. He started his engine and drove out of the lot without looking back. The woman scrambled into her blue sedan and sped off in the opposite direction. I sat in my car behind the rusted billboard. My heart hammered against my ribs. The realization washed over me like freezing water. Cole was not having an affair. The secret he was keeping had absolutely nothing to do with romance. He was actively gathering physical evidence. He was building a massive paper trail. The woman in the parking lot was terrified of him. She had handed over documents that she clearly did not want to surrender. And the clothing she wore sparked a terrifying memory. The dark scrubs matched the exact uniform code worn by the nursing staff at the Georgia Fertility Institute. My husband was investigating my failed pregnancy. He was meeting with a clinic employee in secret. He was hiding the evidence from me while allowing my sister to touch his leg at family dinners. The puzzle pieces were floating around my head, but the complete picture remained horrifyingly unclear. Was Cole helping my mother build a case to prove I was medically unfit? Was he collecting proof to justify leaving me for Harper? I put my car in drive and pulled away from the billboard. I was completely alone in a nightmare created by my own family. I needed help to uncover the contents of that manila envelope. I needed an ally before my mother successfully replaced me with my own sister. I had no idea that my silent prayer for an ally was about to be answered by the one person I least expected. When I returned home that afternoon, a rusty pickup truck would be sitting in my driveway. The man waiting for me would deliver a cryptic warning and a symbol of hope that would finally break this mystery wide open. The drive back from the industrial district took 20 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my fingers went numb. My mind spun in 1,000 different directions. I had just watched my husband receive a secret package from a terrified fertility clinic nurse. I was drowning in a sea of questions. I turned onto my quiet suburban street, desperate for a moment of peace to organize my thoughts. Instead, I saw a faded red pickup truck parked in my driveway. I recognized the rusted tailgate immediately. It belonged to my father. Thomas Anderson was a retired mechanic who spent his entire life covered in motor oil and heavy grease. He was a man of very few words. For 3 decades, he had remained a silent ghost inside his own home. He survived my mother by treating their marriage like a broken engine he could not fix. He just kept his head down and stayed out of her way. Whenever Beverly launched one of her cruel attacks against me, my father would look at the floor. He never raised his voice to defend me. He chose survival over protection. Seeing his truck parked outside my house on a Monday afternoon sent a jolt of panic through my chest. My father never visited me alone. He never did anything without Beverly issuing a direct order. I pulled my sedan up to the curb and cut the engine. The Georgia heat radiated off the asphalt as I stepped out of the vehicle. My father was standing near the open door of my garage. He wore his usual faded denim jeans and a plaid work shirt. His hands were calloused and stained with years of dark grease that no amount of scrubbing could ever remove. He did not walk toward me to offer a greeting. He did not smile. He simply turned his back and lowered the heavy tailgate of his truck. I walked up the concrete driveway. "Dad," I said, "what are you doing here? Is Mom okay?" He ignored my questions. He reached into the truck bed and grabbed the edge of a large object wrapped in thick gray moving blankets. He grunted with the effort as he slid the heavy item toward the edge of the tailgate. He wrapped his strong arms around the bulk and carried it carefully into my open garage. He set it down gently on the cement floor. I followed him inside the dim space. He reached out and pulled the heavy gray blankets away. The breath caught in my throat. It was a wooden bassinet. It was not something bought from a high-end baby boutique. It was handcrafted from solid oak. The wood was polished to a smooth, warm finish. I could see the intricate dovetail joints holding the corners together. I could smell the sharp scent of fresh wood stain mixed with the faint odor of motor oil from his clothes. He had spent hours cutting and sanding every single piece by hand. He had poured his silent love into this small piece of furniture. He had built a bed for a grandchild. Looking at that beautiful, empty wooden cradle broke whatever fragile composure I had left. The dam holding back my grief shattered. All the stress from the past few weeks hit me like a physical blow. The crushing debt from the medical bills, the humiliating Sunday dinners watching Harper touch my husband, the terrifying secret meeting in the diner parking lot, and the devastating reality that my body had failed to create the one thing this bassinet was meant to hold. I dropped to my knees on the hard cement floor. A harsh, ugly sob ripped from my throat. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to hide the tears streaming down my cheeks. "Dad, it failed," I cried. My voice echoed against the bare garage walls. The 3rd cycle failed. There is no baby. There is never going to be a baby. Mom was right. I am empty. You need to take it back. I cannot look at it. I waited for him to kneel beside me. I waited for the awkward pat on the back or the generic words of comfort people always offer when they do not know how to handle grief. My father did not move. He stood perfectly still, staring at the wooden slats of the bassinet. He refused to look down at me. His jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. He gripped the top rail of the baby bed. His knuckles turned stark white against the dark oak. He looked like a man fighting a violent war inside his own head. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick and raspy. It sounded like a rusty hinge breaking open after years of being forced shut. Truth wins, Amity. He did not yell, but the words carried a heavy, unshakable weight. Even when it waits, keep the bassinet. I wiped my wet face with the back of my hand and looked up at him. I did not understand what he meant. He was speaking in riddles. What truth was he talking about? Why was he delivering a piece of nursery furniture behind my mother's back? He let go of the wooden rail. He walked past me, heading back toward his rusted truck. I thought he was leaving. I thought he was retreating back into his shell of silence. But he stopped right at the edge of the driveway where the shadow of the garage met the bright afternoon sun. He turned around and walked back to where I was still kneeling on the floor. He reached deep into the front pocket of his worn jeans. He pulled his hand out and reached down toward me. He grabbed my right hand. His rough, calloused fingers pressed something cold and hard into my palm. He folded my fingers over the object tight. He leaned down close to my ear. He smelled like peppermint and old tobacco. "Do not let her erase you," he whispered. Then he let go of my hand. He walked out to his truck. He climbed into the driver's seat and started the loud, rattling engine. He did not look in the rearview mirror as he backed out into the street and drove away. I knelt on the garage floor listening to the sound of his engine fade into the distance. The quiet returned to the suburban street. I sat there alone next to the handcrafted oak bed. I slowly opened my clenched fist. Resting in the center of my palm was a small brass key. It was old and tarnished. Attached to the top loop of the key was a tiny white paper tag. The tag had a short address written in my father's messy block handwriting. It was the location of a local self-storage facility located 2 towns over. My mind raced. My father had never kept secrets. He was a simple man who wanted a simple life. Yet he had just driven across town while my mother was busy at her country club to deliver a clandestine message. He had brought me a symbol of hope and a physical key to a hidden door. "Do not let her erase you." The warning echoed in my ears. Erase me from what? From my family? From my marriage? I looked at the brass key glinting in the dim garage light. The mystery was deepening. Cole was collecting medical files from a frightened nurse. My father was handing over keys to secret storage units. Everyone around me was operating in the shadows, while my mother and sister paraded their victory in the broad daylight. I stood up. I wiped the dust from my knees. I looked at the beautiful oak bassinet one last time before walking into the house. I walked through the kitchen and headed straight toward the front hallway. I needed answers. I could not drive to the storage unit right now. The facility would be closed by the time I navigated the late afternoon traffic. I would have to go tomorrow. But I could not wait another 24 hours to find a piece of the truth. I needed something right now to anchor my sanity. I stopped at the bottom of the staircase. Sitting on the wooden bench in the hallway was Cole's black canvas gym bag. He had left it there before going to work. He rarely forgot his bag. It usually contained nothing but a change of clothes and a water bottle. But today, things were different. Today, I knew he was hiding a massive paper trail. I stared at the black canvas. I knew opening that bag was crossing another line. I was about to violate my husband's privacy, just as I had violated it by reading the glowing text message on his phone. But my father had just given me permission to fight back. He told me the truth would win. I reached out and grabbed the metal zipper. The rough sound of the teeth pulling apart echoed in the silent hallway. I dug my hands past the sweaty athletic shirts and the clean white towels. My fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular, hidden at the very bottom. It was not a manila envelope. It was not a medical file. It was a small notebook, and the words written on the pages inside would flip my entire reality upside down. The contents of that notebook would prove that the enemy I was fighting was much closer than I ever imagined. I pulled the small blue notebook from the bottom of the canvas gym bag. The cover was bound in cheap faux leather. The edges were worn down from being shoved into pockets and backpacks. It looked like the kind of pocket journal a student might carry. I turned it over in my hands. The spine cracked slightly as I opened the front cover. The pages inside were filled with neat, precise handwriting. The blue ink flowed across the lined paper in structured lists. I recognized the script immediately. It was the same handwriting Cole used to grade essays and write lesson plans on his classroom whiteboard. I leaned against the hallway wall and let my eyes trace the first line on the page. The date was written in the left margin, September 12th, Beverly, Coaches, Harper, Texts. I stared at the sentence. My mind rushed backward, trying to place that specific date. September 12th was a Thursday. I remembered receiving a bizarre text message from my sister that afternoon. Harper had asked to borrow my silver serving platter for a dinner party, but the phrasing of her message was strange. She used words like obligation and presentation. Those were not words my sister ever used in casual conversation. They were words my mother used. I had brushed it off at the time, but Cole had not brushed it off. He had documented it. He recognized my mother's manipulation, pulling the strings behind my sister's actions. I turned the page. The next entry made the air stall in my lungs. October 4, transfer day, Renee on shift, first red flag. The notebook slipped slightly in my trembling fingers. October 4 was the darkest day of my calendar. It was the morning of my third embryo transfer at the Georgia Fertility Institute. The name printed in blue ink jumped off the paper. Renee. The pieces began clicking together at a terrifying speed. Renee was the woman from the glowing text message at 2 a.m. She was the terrified woman standing in the diner parking lot, handing over a thick envelope. And according to my husband's private journal, she was on shift during my medical procedure. I closed my eyes. I forced my brain to recreate the sterile environment of the transfer suite. I remembered the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I remembered the smell of rubbing alcohol and medical-grade sanitizer. I remembered lying on the examination table wrapped in a thin blue paper gown. My doctor had walked into the room holding my chart. He was flanked by a night shift nurse. The memory of the nurse snapped into sharp focus. She wore dark blue scrubs. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, messy ponytail. She had avoided making eye contact with me while prepping the ultrasound machine. That nurse was the woman from the diner parking lot. That nurse was Renee. I opened my eyes and looked back down at the notebook. I flipped to the next page. November 8. Secured the voicemails. Voicemails. The word echoed in my mind. What voicemails had he secured? The only person who called Cole regularly outside of work was my sister. Harper often called him when I was working long shifts at the hospital. She always claimed she needed advice on her car or help navigating her divorce paperwork. I had always assumed those phone calls were innocent. But if Cole was documenting them in this secret journal, they were not innocent at all. Harper was leaving audio evidence of her intentions. A profound, heavy realization washed over me. The ground beneath my feet shifted as my entire perspective of the last 6 months shattered and reformed. Cole was not having an affair. He was not checking out of our marriage. He was not building a legal case to divorce me. My husband was investigating my family. He had seen the trap my mother was setting long before I did. He noticed the orchestrated seating charts at Sunday dinner. He recognized the inappropriate physical touches from my sister. He heard the venom in my mother's voice when she called my house depressingly quiet. But instead of throwing a tantrum and looking like a paranoid madman, Cole had done what he does best. He approached my toxic family like a historical research project. He knew that confronting Beverly without solid proof was a losing battle. My mother controlled the narrative in our community. She would twist any accusation into a weapon against us. If Cole complained about Harper touching his thigh, Beverly would call him delusional. She would spin a story about Cole being aggressive and unstable. So Cole went silent. He allowed Harper to lean across his chair. He let her trace circles on his knee under the dining table. He did not pull away because he was giving them enough rope to hang themselves. He needed them to feel arrogant. He needed them to feel invincible. When arrogant people feel safe, they get sloppy. They leave digital footprints. They leave voicemails. He took phone calls on the back porch because he was tracking down leads. He closed his laptop when I walked into the room because he was protecting me from the ugly truth until he had an airtight case. He met the frightened nurse in the shadows because he was collecting the final pieces of the puzzle. Cole was not my enemy. He was my fiercest protector. He was standing on the front lines of a war I did not even know we were fighting. A wave of intense guilt hit my chest. I had doubted him. I had sat next to him on the couch and wondered if he was trading me in for my younger sister. While I was wallowing in insecurity, my husband was tearing the city apart, trying to find out who hurt me. I pressed the small blue notebook against my chest. The relief of knowing my marriage was safe lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then, the horrifying reality of the other entries crashed down on me. If Cole was tracking a nurse from the fertility clinic, the failure of my third cycle was not a biological tragedy. It was not a medical anomaly. It was an orchestrated sabotage. My mother wanted me broken. She wanted my house empty so she could convince Cole to leave me. But how far had she gone to secure her desired outcome? Beverly was ruthless, but she did not have a medical degree. She could not walk into a secure embryology lab and tamper with human cells. She needed an inside operative. She needed a weapon. Renee was the weapon. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Harper must have known Renee. They were roughly the same age. They grew up in the same Savannah circles. My sister had found a weak link inside the clinic. She found a nurse who was willing to risk her career for the right price. Beverly supplied the cash from her bottomless bank account. They paid an employee to make sure my final embryo never had a chance to survive. My own flesh and blood had reached into the most sacred, vulnerable part of my life and destroyed it, just to win a game of social chess. The grief that had paralyzed me in the garage vanished. It evaporated into thin air. A hot, pulsing rage took its place. The sadness over my empty womb morphed into a fierce, blinding anger. I was no longer a grieving victim. I was a trained medical professional. I understood chain of custody logs. I understood sterile environments and culture mediums. I walked into the kitchen and set the blue notebook on the granite island. I stared at the dark screen of my own phone resting on the counter. Cole had secured the voicemails. He had retrieved the documents from Renee. He was doing the heavy lifting. But I needed to know exactly what happened inside that transfer suite. I needed to know the biological mechanics of their crime. I could not just wait for Cole to explain it to me. I had to verify the medical logs myself. I picked up my phone. I unlocked the screen and opened my contacts list. Before I became a neonatal nurse, I spent 2 years working in the general obstetrics ward at the local hospital. During that time, I shared many shifts with a brilliant charting specialist named Sarah. Sarah left the hospital 3 years ago to take a lucrative data management position. She now ran the entire digital records department at the Georgia Fertility Institute. Sarah was the one person who could bypass the standard bureaucratic delays. She had the security clearance to access the raw system logs from any date on the calendar. I dialed her number. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I did not ask about her weekend or her family. I needed the raw, undisputed facts. The truth my father spoke about in the garage was hiding inside a computer server across town, and I was about to drag it into the light. I gripped my cell phone and listened to the ringing tone. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Sarah answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was sharp and professional. Sarah was the director of data management at the Georgia Fertility Institute. We had worked together years ago in the obstetrics ward before she transitioned into health informatics. She was a meticulous woman who prided herself on flawless record-keeping. She hated errors, and she despised anyone who broke medical protocol. "Sarah," I said. My voice sounded hollow. "I need a massive favor, and I cannot explain why just yet. I need you to pull the raw system logs for my embryo transfer on October 4th. There was a brief pause on the line. "Amity, you know those records are sealed in the main database," Sarah replied. "I can access them, but the system flags any manual override. Is something wrong with your billing?" "It is not a billing issue," I told her. I kept my tone low and steady. "I need you to check the keycard access logs for the sterile suite. I need you to look at the automated dispenser records. Please, Sarah, look for any activity connected to a night shift nurse named Renee." The line went silent. I could hear the faint clicking of a computer keyboard in the background. "Give me 10 minutes, Sarah said. Her professional tone had shifted into quiet concern. "I will call you right back." The call disconnected. I placed the phone flat on the granite kitchen island. The silence in my house felt suffocating. I paced back and forth across the hardwood floor. As a neonatal nurse, I spent every working hour managing fragile lives. I knew how carefully we monitored every single drop of intravenous fluid. I knew that a microscopic change in a nutrient solution could cause a premature baby to spiral into organ failure. The medical field relies on absolute trust. When a patient lies on an examination table, they are surrendering their safety to the people wearing the scrubs. If someone intentionally tampered with my medical procedure, they did not just break a hospital rule. They reached into my womb and destroyed my future. My phone buzzed against the stone counter. I snatched it up and answered without checking the screen. Amity Sarah said. Her voice was trembling. The sharp, confident director I knew was gone. She sounded terrified. "What did you find?" I asked. I braced my free hand against the edge of the island to keep my knees from buckling. "I pulled the security audit from the embryology lab on October 4th, Sarah whispered. "The digital footprint is undeniable." At 11:15 in the morning, the lead embryologist received an urgent page from the front desk. The system log shows his keycard swiping out of the sterile suite at 11:16. He left the room to answer the page. "Who was left in the room?" I demanded. Sarah took a shaky breath. The assisting nurse. Her employee ID scanned at the central prep station exactly 30 seconds after the doctor walked out. It was Renee. My throat tightened. "What did she do, Sarah? Tell me the truth." "She logged into the environmental control system," Sarah explained. "The software tracks every time a storage vial or a nutrient dispenser is opened. Renee accessed the specific culture medium holding your embryo. She did not just open the incubator, Amity. She used the automated pipettes." Sarah paused. I could hear her swallowing hard. She added sterile saline to the petri dish environment. The clinical coldness of the act hit me like a physical blow. "Why saline?" I asked. My medical training struggled to catch up with the sheer cruelty of the situation. "Why not just destroy the cells right there on the counter?" "Because the doctor would have noticed," Sarah said. "If she ruined the embryo in the dish, the doctor would have seen the degradation under the microscope before the transfer." Renee was too smart for that. She calculated the dilution perfectly. She added just enough saline to weaken the cell walls without causing immediate collapse. She compromised the nutrient bath. The horrifying reality settled over me. Renee designed the embryo to fail. She ensured the doctor would proceed with the transfer, believing everything was perfectly healthy. I went home that afternoon carrying a false hope. I spent 10 days talking to my stomach and praying for a miracle, while a ticking time bomb sat inside my uterus. Renee knew the diluted cells would stop dividing within a week. She orchestrated a silent, invisible death that looked exactly like a natural tragedy. "I am locking these files right now," Sarah said. Her voice grew frantic. "I am calling the clinic ethics board. I am calling the state medical commission. This is a severe criminal offense, Amity. She will lose her license today." "No," I said sharply. "Do not call anyone yet." "Amity, she altered your medical procedure," Sarah argued. "She caused your cycle to fail." "I know what she did," I replied. My voice was no longer shaking. A cold, focused rage had replaced the grief. But Renee did not do this on her own. She is just a hired gun. Someone paid her to do it. If you report her right now, she will panic and destroy the evidence linking her to the person who hired her. I need 48 hours, Sarah. Just keep the files secure. I hung up the phone before she could argue further. I stood in my kitchen and stared at the blue notebook resting near my sink. Cole had documented everything. He knew Renee was the operative. But I needed to know the origin of the connection. How did my mother and my sister find a corrupt nurse willing to commit a medical crime? Beverly ran a tight circle of wealthy country club friends. She did not associate with hourly hospital workers. The link had to come from Harper. I opened my laptop and pulled up my sister's social media profile. Harper was an incredibly vain woman. She documented every single moment of her life for public validation. She had thousands of photographs categorized into neat little albums. I navigated to her main page. I scrolled past the recent posts seeking sympathy for her divorce. I bypassed the endless pictures of her sipping mimosas on outdoor patios. I kept scrolling backward. I moved past her extravagant wedding photos. I went back 8 years. I searched for her time at the State University. I found an album titled Spring Formal. There were over 200 pictures inside. I clicked through the digital gallery. Harper was a 21-year-old college student wearing a bright pink gown. She was posing with various fraternity boys and sorority sisters. She held plastic cups and smiled brightly for the flashing cameras. I reached photograph number 42. Harper was standing shoulder to shoulder with another girl. The other girl wore a simple black dress. She did not have the polished, wealthy look that Harper meticulously maintained. Her hair was pulled back into a messy style. I leaned closer to the screen. My eyes scanned the facial features. I compared the young college student in the photo to the terrified nurse I saw standing in the diner parking lot just a few hours ago. It was the same woman. I looked at the caption written below the photograph. Harper had typed a short, celebratory sentence. "Best friends since day one. Love my Renee." I pushed the laptop away. The screen glared at me from across the granite counter. The final piece of the puzzle snapped into place with a sickening crunch. My sister had used her college best friend to kill my chance at a family. Harper had maintained that friendship for 8 years. When Beverly decided that I was a bad investment, for my husband, Harper knew exactly who to call. They found the one person working inside my fertility clinic who was willing to prioritize a cash payout over a medical oath. Harper paid her best friend to dilute my culture medium. They sat at my dining room table and watched me cry over the negative pregnancy test, knowing they were the ones who orchestrated the failure. They offered me fake sympathy while secretly celebrating their success. The betrayal was so deep it felt like it had hollowed out my bones. My own flesh and blood had crossed a line so vile it defied human logic. But I still lacked the fundamental blueprint of their plan. I knew how they executed the sabotage. I knew who pulled the trigger. I did not know the exact timeline of their endgame. Beverly never did anything without a rigid, calculated schedule. If my mother paid for this crime, she had a specific date in mind for the ultimate payoff. She was building a stage to swap me out for my sister. I needed to see her master plan. I needed to read the exact words she used to construct this nightmare. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small brass key my father had pressed into my palm earlier that afternoon. The white paper tag dangled from the metal ring. The address for the storage unit was written in his messy handwriting. Thomas Anderson had watched this conspiracy unfold from the shadows. He had quietly gathered the proof while Beverly paraded her victory around Savannah. He told me not to let her erase me. He handed me the weapon I needed to strike back. I looked out the kitchen window into the dark Georgia night. The street was quiet and peaceful. Tomorrow morning the sun would rise and I would drive to that facility. I would turn the lock on that metal door. I was going to find out exactly how my mother planned to dismantle my marriage. I was ready to read her dirty secrets. The morning sun baked the asphalt as I drove toward the address my father had written on the paper tag. The facility sat on the edge of the neighboring town. It was a desolate lot, surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence and topped with coiled wire. I pulled my silver sedan up to the security gate. The keypad accepted the code written on the back of the small tag. The metal gate slid open with a harsh mechanical grind. I drove down the narrow lanes between long rows of orange metal doors. The air smelled of hot dust and baking pavement. I parked in front of unit number 42. I turned off the engine and sat in the quiet car for a moment. My hands rested heavily on the steering wheel. Last night, I uncovered the clinical execution of my nightmare. I knew my sister paid a nurse to ruin my chance at motherhood. Now I was about to uncover the mind that engineered the entire plot. I stepped out into the heavy heat and walked up to the bright orange door. The brass key slid into the padlock. It turned with a crisp click. I pulled the heavy metal latch and hauled the door upward. It rumbled loudly as it rolled into the ceiling track. The storage space was small and windowless. A single bare light bulb hung from a pole chain in the center. I tugged the string, and a harsh yellow glow illuminated the cement floor. The unit was entirely empty, except for one object sitting in the middle of the room. It was a standard cardboard moving box resting on a wooden pallet. I walked over and folded back the cardboard flaps. Inside the box sat a towering stack of printer paper. The pages were bound together in thick sections using silver binder clips. I reached in and pulled out the top stack. The page on top was a printed email chain. The sender address belonged to my mother's personal account. I sat down on the hard cement floor right there in the dusty unit. I began to read. My father, Thomas, had spent his entire marriage playing the role of a silent mechanic. Beverly treated him like a piece of faded furniture. She spoke over him. She ignored his presence in the room. She never bothered to hide her actions from him because she did not believe he possessed the spine to challenge her. That arrogance became her fatal flaw. Thomas had watched her punch the passcode into her silver tablet 100 times. While Beverly spent her afternoons drinking wine at the country club, Thomas sat at the kitchen island. He opened her email application. He silently forwarded her most damning conversations to a secure account he created at the local public library. Then he printed every single word. He gathered the evidence while pretending to fix the lawnmower. The stack in my lap contained 14 separate email threads. They were all directed to a high-profile family law firm located in Atlanta. Beverly had specifically chosen an attorney 3 hours away from Savannah to ensure no local gossip leaked out to her friends. I scanned the first message. It was dated back in late August. Beverly had reached out to schedule an initial consultation regarding a complex marital dissolution. The lawyer responded, asking for the names of the filing parties. Beverly replied that she was inquiring on behalf of her daughter. The sickness in my stomach churned. She was laying the groundwork before Harper even started attending our Sunday dinners. I flipped through the pages. The correspondence detailed intense financial questions. Beverly asked the attorney to outline the exact division of assets in Georgia if a couple divorced without a prenuptial agreement. She provided the attorney with my salary figures and Cole's teaching income. She listed the estimated market value of our suburban house. She wanted to know if a judge would award the marital home to a husband if the wife was deemed medically or emotionally unstable. She was calculating my financial ruin. She wanted to strip me of my home and hand it to my husband. But the true horror hid in the 7th email thread. I stared at the paragraph printed in sharp black ink. The date on the message was exactly 2 weeks after my sister visited my home, smelling of jasmine perfume. Beverly had typed a direct question to the senior partner. I need to understand the realistic timeline of these proceedings, the message read. Hypothetically, if my son-in-law were to be seduced by my other daughter, how quickly could the divorce be finalized in the state of Georgia? We need him free by the anniversary. My breath caught in my throat. I read the sentence again. Seduced by my other daughter. The phrase was devoid of any human morality. There was no guilt. There was no hesitation. My mother viewed my marriage as a simple logistical problem. She viewed my husband as a piece of property she could reassign to a different child. The terrifying scope of her plan crystallized in my mind. Everything traced back to Harper's messy separation. When Harper's ex-husband walked out, he exposed the ugly truth behind her perfect facade. He left her with crushing debt and a tarnished reputation. In Beverly's social circle, a divorced daughter was a severe embarrassment. The country club women thrived on whispered scandals. Beverly could not stand the pitying looks from her wealthy friends. She needed to fix Harper's image immediately. She needed a respectable, stable partner to step in and play the role of the devoted new husband. Cole was handsome. He was a dedicated teacher and a respected football coach. He owned a beautiful home. He checked every single box on Beverly's list of social requirements. But Cole was married to me. Beverly knew Cole was fiercely loyal. He would never walk away from a healthy, happy marriage. So she decided to make my marriage sick. She decided to break me. She manipulated my fertility treatments to ensure my house remained empty. She knew the grief of failing to conceive would push me to the edge of despair. She planned to use my sorrow to paint me as a depressed, unstable burden. Once I was sufficiently broken, she would push Harper into his arms, offering a fun, stress-free alternative. She orchestrated the sabotage to make Cole feel trapped so Harper could be his savior, and she wanted it all finalized by her 40th anniversary party. I looked at the printed date of the upcoming party. The country club gala was scheduled for exactly 2 weeks from today. Beverly wanted Cole to attend that event on Harper's arm. She wanted to stand in front of her 50 wealthy friends and present her golden child with a respectable new partner. She wanted to announce that Harper had gracefully rescued a good man from a miserable situation. I sat on the cement floor holding the printed blueprint of my own destruction. The dust in the storage unit clung to my clothes. The harsh light bulb cast long shadows against the metal walls. A strange calm washed over me. The grief was entirely gone. The confusion had vanished. My mother and sister had spent 6 months digging a grave for me. They had ruined my embryo. They had violated my home. They had treated my husband like a prize to be won in a rigged carnival game. I carefully stacked the papers back together. I clipped them tight and placed them back inside the cardboard box. I closed the flaps and picked up the heavy load. I walked out of the unit and pulled the rolling door down until it locked into the concrete. I placed the box in the trunk of my car. I knew exactly what I had to do next. My mother had a strict timeline. She had set the date for her grand victory. I was not going to disrupt her schedule. I was going to let her build her beautiful stage. I was going to let her invite every single one of her judging friends. When I arrived home later that afternoon, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A new notification flashed on the screen. Beverly had created a family group chat to micromanage the upcoming anniversary party. Her name glowed on the display. She was sending out the dress code requirements and the seating chart. She was laying the final trap for me. She had no idea I was bringing a wrecking ball to her celebration. The phone buzzed on the granite counter. The screen illuminated the dim kitchen. I had just walked through the front door after securing the cardboard box of printed emails in my car trunk. The notification tone chirped again. Then it chirped 3 more times in rapid succession. I set my keys down and picked up the device. My mother had created a digital group chat. The heading read, 40th Anniversary Gala. She added over 50 contacts, aunts, uncles, cousins, and a curated list of her most influential country club peers were all locked into the thread. Beverly wasted no time establishing her authority. Her messages flowed onto the screen in sharp, demanding paragraphs. She outlined the exact arrival times. She dictated the parking arrangements. She reminded everyone that the hired photographer would begin taking candid shots precisely at 4 p.m. I scrolled through the endless logistics. Beverly treated family gatherings like military operations. Every detail had to reflect her flawless image. A few relatives replied with heart emojis and cheerful acknowledgments. I typed nothing. I just watched the screen update. A separate notification popped up at the top of my display. It was a private message directly from Beverly. I tapped the alert. The text was short and calculated. Amity, dear, please wear the dark gray dress. The bright colors wash out your complexion lately. My teeth ground together. The insult was carefully wrapped in false maternal concern. She was referencing the physical toll the hormone injections had taken on my body. The fertility treatments had left dark circles under my eyes. The stress had drained the color from my cheeks. Beverly knew exactly why I looked tired. Instead of offering comfort, she weaponized my medical trauma. She wanted me draped in dull gray fabric. She wanted me to fade into the background like a shadow. She was designing me to look like a depressed, exhausted burden. 10 minutes later, my phone chimed with an update in the main group chat. Beverly posted a message for all 50 guests to read. Just finished a final fitting with Harper. She will be wearing a stunning white cocktail dress. The silk looks divine on her. We cannot wait for everyone to see it. The audacity made my breath hitch. In our Southern social circles, wearing a white cocktail dress to an anniversary party was a deliberate statement. White was reserved for brides. Beverly was not just choosing an outfit for her golden child. She was presenting Harper as a fresh start. She was setting my sister up as the beautiful, radiant alternative to my dull gray existence. The final blow arrived 5 minutes later. Beverly uploaded a digital file to the main thread. It was the official seating chart for the catered dinner. I opened the image and zoomed in on the patio layout. The tables were arranged in a wide semicircle around the main dance floor. Table 1 was positioned right in the center. It was the place of honor. Beverly placed herself at the head of that table. She put my silent father Thomas on her right. She placed my husband Cole on her left. And directly next to Cole, she placed Harper. My eyes scanned the rest of the diagram, searching for my own name. I did not find it at table 2. I did not find it at table 3. I found my name printed in tiny letters at table 5. It was the farthest table from the center stage. It was positioned right next to the swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen. Every time a waiter brought out a tray of food, those doors would bang open. It was the worst seat in the entire yard. Furthermore, Beverly had assigned my seatmate. I was placed next to Pastor Miller. Pastor Miller was a kind elderly man who led the largest congregation in Savannah. He was also incredibly naive. Beverly funded the church choir and paid for the annual holiday decorations. The pastor viewed my mother as a pillar of faith and generosity. Putting me next to him was a strategic masterstroke. Beverly knew I respected the church. She knew I would never raise my voice or cause a public scene while sitting next to a man of the cloth. She had isolated me. She had trapped me in a corner where I had to smile and eat my dinner in silence while watching my sister play house with my husband. I locked the phone screen and tossed the device back onto the granite island. The trap was fully set. Beverly had engineered the perfect social execution. The sound of a heavy truck engine pulling into the driveway broke the silence. Cole was home from football practice. I heard the familiar thud of his boots on the front porch. The door opened, and he walked inside. He smelled like cut grass and athletic tape. His hair was damp with sweat. He offered me a tired but genuine smile as he set his keys in the ceramic bowl near the entrance. "How was your day?" he asked. He walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator to grab a bottle of cold water. I did not answer immediately. I picked up my phone and unlocked the screen. I opened the group chat and navigated to the seating chart. I walked over to him and held the device up so he could see the display. "Look at what your mother-in-law just sent," I said. My voice was tight. I kept my eyes on his face, watching for any sign of panic or guilt. Cole took a long drink from his water bottle. He set the plastic container on the counter and took the phone from my hand. His eyes scanned the private message about the gray dress. He read the public announcement about the white cocktail dress. Then he studied the digital map of the dining tables. He saw his name written next to Harper at table 1. He saw my name banished to the kitchen doors at table 5. I waited for him to react. I expected anger. I expected him to curse or shake his head in disgust. I expected him to offer to call Beverly and demand a change to the arrangement. He did none of those things. His facial expression remained calm. A quiet, calculated focus settled into his dark eyes. He looked like a chess player who had just watched his opponent make a fatal, unforced error. Cole handed the phone back to me. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around my waist. He pulled me against his chest. I rested my chin on his shoulder. The solid weight of his embrace grounded me. All the anxiety and isolation I had felt over the last few hours began to drain away. He leaned down and pressed a firm kiss against my forehead. His lips lingered against my skin for a long second. "Let them build their stage." "Amity," he said softly. His voice held no fear. It held nothing but cold, unwavering certainty. "We are bringing the wrecking ball." A shiver ran down my spine. The promise in his words was electric. Cole had the voicemails. He had the clinic documents from Renee. I had the printed divorce emails stored in the trunk of my car. My father had supplied the final key to their destruction. We held every single piece of evidence required to level Beverly's kingdom. I pulled back and looked up into his eyes. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We play our parts," he replied. "We show up on time. We smile at her country club friends. We let Harper wear her white dress and sit exactly where she wants to sit. We give them everything they ask for until the very last second." I nodded. The dread that had been choking me for 6 months was gone. I felt dangerous. I felt ready. Later that evening, I walked upstairs to our bedroom closet. I bypassed the dull gray dress hanging near the front. I reached far into the back and pulled out a stunning navy blue gown. It was tailored sharp and fierce. It was a dress designed to stand out. It was a dress worn by a woman who refused to fade into the background. I hung it on the back of the bedroom door. The final 2 weeks felt like a strange, surreal countdown. The group chat buzzed daily with Beverly's demands. She ordered specific floral arrangements. She complained about the catering menu. She reminded everyone to bring gifts that matched her specific registry. Through it all, Cole and I remained silent. We absorbed every command without a single word of protest. Harper sent Cole a few more text messages. She asked what color tie he planned to wear so she could coordinate her jewelry. Cole simply replied with the color navy. He never engaged in further conversation. He saved every digital interaction to a secure folder on his laptop. The storm was gathering just over the horizon. The trap was primed, and the players were taking their positions. My mother believed she had orchestrated the flawless public victory. She thought she was about to erase my marriage and hand my life over to her favorite child. She had no idea the trap was actually closing around her own throat. The day of the anniversary party was approaching fast, and the stage was set for the ultimate reckoning. Saturday arrived with thick Savannah humidity. The air felt heavy and unforgiving. I drove my car up the winding paved driveway toward my parents' estate. The sprawling property looked immaculate. Beverly had hired a landscaping crew to trim every single hedge into sharp geometric shapes. A string quartet played classical music on the far side of the stone patio. Caterers wearing crisp white shirts carried silver trays of expensive appetizers through a crowd of 50 wealthy guests. It was the perfect stage for my mother to execute her grand design. I stepped out of my car. I did not wear the dull gray dress my mother demanded. I wore the dark navy gown. The fabric wrapped perfectly around my frame. It was bold and sharp. It demanded attention. It was the exact opposite of a woman fading into the background. Cole stepped out of his truck parked next to mine. He wore his sharp, tailored suit. He walked around the vehicles and offered me his arm. We walked up the front walkway together, ready to face the firing squad. Beverly stood near the entrance of the garden, greeting her country club friends. She wore a sparkling silver gown that caught the afternoon sunlight. She was laughing loudly at a joke told by the local bank president. Then she turned her head and saw me walking toward her. Her laughter stopped abruptly. Her eyes locked onto my navy dress. The fake, welcoming smile vanished for a fraction of a second. Her jaw clenched tight. I saw genuine fury flash across her face. She had ordered me to look like a depressed, exhausted shadow. I showed up looking like a warrior preparing for battle. Beverly quickly recovered. She pasted her wide plastic smile back into place as the bank president turned to follow her gaze. "Amity, darling," Beverly called out. Her voice dripped with fake Southern sweetness. "You made it, and you chose that dress. How incredibly brave of you." I did not flinch. I smiled right back. "It is a special occasion, Mom. I wanted to wear something strong." Beverly narrowed her eyes. Her fingers gripped the stem of her champagne flute. Before she could fire another passive-aggressive insult, Harper materialized from the crowd. My sister wore a skin-tight white silk cocktail dress. She looked exactly like a bride attending her own rehearsal dinner. She ignored me entirely. She walked straight past me and stepped right into Cole's personal space. She held 2 crystal glasses of bourbon over ice. Her gold bracelets clinked together loudly. "Cole, you look parched," Harper said. Her voice was breathy and loud, designed to draw the attention of the surrounding guests. She handed him a glass. Her fingers brushed deliberately against his knuckles. She leaned in so close, her lips almost touched his earlobe. Let me show you where we are sitting. Mom put us right up front at the head table. Cole took the glass of bourbon. He gave me a brief, unreadable glance. Then he nodded at Harper. "Lead the way," he said. His voice was steady and calm. He was playing his part flawlessly. He allowed my sister to loop her arm through his. She guided him toward the center of the patio like a prized trophy won at an auction. I watched them walk away. The rage that used to consume me was gone. It was replaced by a cold, clinical focus. I knew exactly what they had done in the dark shadows of the fertility clinic. Now I was going to watch them perform their twisted play in the broad daylight. I turned and walked toward the back of the yard. I navigated past the beautifully decorated dining areas until I reached table 5. It was shoved into the far corner right next to the heavy wooden doors of the catering kitchen. A waiter pushed through the doors carrying a massive tray of empty plates. The loud clatter of silverware echoed around the table. Beverly had literally placed me next to the garbage collection zone. I pulled out my assigned chair and sat down. The seat next to me was already occupied. Pastor Miller sat quietly with his hands folded over the polished wooden handle of his walking cane. He had led our local congregation for 40 years. He baptized me when I was an infant. He married Cole and me in his church sanctuary. He was a man who spent his entire life listening to whispered confessions and observing human behavior. He knew when people were lying, and he knew when people were hurting. "Good afternoon, Amity," he said softly. His warm brown eyes studied my face, analyzing my calm demeanor. "Good afternoon, Pastor," I replied. I picked up the heavy cloth napkin and placed it on my lap. He looked around the crowded patio. He watched the waiters rushing in and out of the kitchen doors beside us. He watched the country club guests drinking expensive champagne at the center tables. Then he looked directly at table 1. He watched Harper lean her body against Cole while Beverly laughed and clapped her hands in approval. He watched my quiet father sit at the edge of the head table, looking down at his empty plate. The pastor saw the entire dynamic playing out across the lawn. The pastor turned his gaze back to me. He did not offer any empty religious platitudes. He did not tell me that heaven had a plan for my fertility struggles. He did not pretend this humiliating seating arrangement was an innocent mistake. "Your mother is a very determined woman, Amity," he said. His voice was low, so only I could hear him over the noise of the crowd. But determination without grace is just cruelty wrapped in expensive fabric. I looked at him in genuine surprise. I expected him to defend Beverly. My mother funded his church choir every single season. She bought the new stained glass windows for the chapel. I thought her massive bank account had purchased his blind loyalty years ago. He saw the shock on my face. He offered a sad, knowing smile. "I appreciate her financial generosity to the parish," he whispered. "But I am an old man. I have seen many people build false idols out of their own vanity. You build a stage this high, and the fall becomes devastating. Are you holding up all right, child?" I smiled at the old man. I felt a sudden surge of respect for his quiet wisdom. "I am holding up just fine, Pastor. The view from this table is actually quite revealing." He nodded slowly. He understood the hidden subtext of my words. He sat back in his chair and maintained his observant silence. He became the moral witness to the unfolding disaster. The afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, dark shadows across the Bermuda grass. The party moved into full swing. The hired photographer circled the patio, snapping candid photos of the wealthy guests. Beverly directed the photographer like a movie director on a film set. She constantly pointed him toward table 1. She wanted a permanent public record of Harper and Cole looking like a happy, functional couple. Every time the camera flashed, Harper escalated her physical contact. She reached over and adjusted Cole's necktie. She rested her hand on the back of his wooden chair. She leaned her head back and laughed loudly at things he did not even say. Each time my sister touched my husband, I did not look away. I did not shed a single tear. I looked directly across the yard at my father. Thomas sat rigid in his chair at the head table. He wore his only good suit. He looked deeply uncomfortable, surrounded by Beverly's pretentious socialite friends. His rough, calloused hands rested awkwardly next to the fine bone china, but his eyes were sharp. Every single time Harper crossed a physical line, Thomas would catch my eye from across the patio. He would raise his right hand and slowly tap his left breast pocket. It was our silent signal. Inside that jacket pocket rested the thick manila folder. It contained the printed divorce emails proving Beverly's premeditated plan to ruin my marriage. It contained the raw data logs from the fertility clinic, proving the intentional sabotage of my embryo. It contained the entire blueprint of their betrayal. Tap, tap. I watched my father's hand drop back to his lap. He was ready. He was no longer the silent, defeated mechanic hiding in the garage. He was a loaded weapon, waiting for the right moment to fire. I took a slow sip of my iced water. The tension in the humid air was so thick, it felt hard to breathe. The guests around us continued their polite conversations, completely unaware that they were sitting on top of a ticking bomb. The country club women gossiped about upcoming charity balls. The men debated recent golf scores. They ate their expensive appetizers and drank their cold bourbon. They did not realize they were about to become the jury in a brutal family trial. At 4:45, the catering staff began clearing the small plates. The main course was about to be served. The string quartet stopped playing their instruments and began packing up their wooden cases. A soft hum of anticipation buzzed through the crowd. This was the moment Beverly had been waiting for all afternoon. The digital schedule she emailed to the group chat dictated that the official toasts would begin exactly at 5 o'clock. She wanted the speeches to happen right before the dinner service, while she had a captive, hungry audience sitting in their seats. Beverly stood up from her chair at table 1. She smoothed the front of her silver gown. She picked up a fresh glass of expensive champagne from a passing waiter. She walked with supreme confidence over to the microphone stand set up near the edge of the stone patio. The chatter among the 50 guests began to die down. People turned their chairs toward the front. The photographer rushed over to capture the big moment. I sat at table 5, near the noisy kitchen doors. Pastor Miller folded his hands together and leaned forward. He could feel the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The quiet sympathy in his eyes turned into guarded anticipation. I looked at Cole. He was sitting right in the center of the trap. Harper was leaning her shoulder entirely against his chest. Cole looked across the yard and found my face in the crowd. He did not smile. He gave me one short, definitive nod. The trap doors were locked tight. The audience was seated and ready. We were about to let my mother and sister dig their own graves in front of the entire town. The public execution of Beverly's flawless reputation was only seconds away. The digital clock on my phone displayed exactly 5 o'clock. The catering staff stopped pouring drinks and stepped back into the shadows of the tall hedges. The string quartet had already packed their wooden instruments. A thick, humid quiet settled over the Savannah estate. This was the exact minute Beverly had scheduled for her grand triumph. A young photographer carrying a heavy digital camera walked to the center of the stone patio. He raised his hand and asked for the immediate family to gather around table 1 for an official portrait. My father, Thomas, remained frozen in his chair. Cole sat perfectly still with his hands resting flat on his thighs. Harper stood hovering right behind Cole's right shoulder. I remained seated at table 5 next to the kitchen doors. I did not move to join them. Beverly did not call my name. She wanted her perfect picture, and I was not part of that specific frame. Pastor Miller sat beside me, watching the scene unfold with intense, sharp eyes. He rested both hands firmly on the handle of his walking cane. The photographer adjusted his heavy lens. He waved his hand toward Harper and Cole. He asked them to move a little closer together to fit into the tight shot. Harper did not just step closer. She used the simple instruction as a green light for her final, bold maneuver. She stepped around to the side of Cole's wooden chair. She held her crystal wine glass high in the air. A bright, calculated smile stretched across her face. "Just squeeze in," she said. Her voice was a loud, theatrical giggle designed to ensure every single guest heard her words. Without waiting for a response, she lowered her body directly onto my husband's lap. The white silk of her cocktail dress pooled over Cole's dark navy trousers. She wrapped her free arm around his neck and leaned her head against his cheek. She looked like a victorious prize fighter claiming her trophy. A loud wave of laughter erupted across the patio. It started at table 1 with Beverly and quickly spread to the surrounding country club friends. Uncle Robert chuckled into his cloth napkin. The local bank president offered a wide, amused grin. They saw a fun, spontaneous moment. They saw a quirky family joke. They did not see the meticulous, toxic calculation behind the movement. I sat in the far corner and watched my sister sit on my husband. A few weeks ago, this sight would have shattered my heart into 1,000 sharp pieces. It would have sent me running to the bathroom to cry until I threw up. But today I felt no sorrow. I felt a cold, hyper-focused adrenaline flooding my veins. Beverly did not waste a single second. The laughter provided the perfect runway for her speech. She stepped away from the table and walked toward the microphone stand positioned near the edge of the manicured lawn. She held her expensive champagne flute in her right hand. She tapped a silver spoon against the delicate crystal glass. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the humid Georgia air. The laughter faded. The 50 guests turned their chairs and focused their attention on the matriarch. To 40 years of marriage, Beverly announced. Her voice boomed through the outdoor speakers. She offered a wide, bright smile to her wealthy audience. 40 years of building a family and maintaining a beautiful home. It takes hard work and total dedication, but most importantly, it takes the right partner. She paused to let the words sink into the crowd. She turned her head and looked directly at table 1. She looked at Cole sitting rigidly in his chair with Harper draped across his lap. "And just look at these two," Beverly continued. Her tone shifted from celebratory to deeply condescending. She gestured toward them with her free hand. "They actually look better together, do they not?" A few scattered chuckles rippled through the front tables. The guests assumed she was making a harmless joke about the awkward seating arrangement. But Beverly was not finished. She was ready to deliver the kill shot. She turned her head and locked her cold eyes directly onto me. She stared past the 50 guests and found my face sitting at the banished table near the kitchen. The fake smile vanished from her lips. Her expression turned into a mask of pure, unfiltered cruelty. "Amity is too busy pumping hormones into her empty body to ever give Cole a real child anyway," Beverly said. The words blasted through the speakers and echoed across the manicured lawn. They bounced off the brick walls of the estate and hung heavily in the suffocating heat. The reaction was instantaneous. The scattered chuckles died in the throats of the guests. The patio plunged into a deafening, terrifying silence. A joke about a sister sitting on a lap was one thing, but publicly mocking a woman's medical trauma and infertility was a severe violation of every social rule in their polite Southern society. The facade cracked right down the middle. At table 3, a woman wearing a pale yellow dress lowered her wine glass. She stared at Beverly with wide, horrified eyes. Next to her, a prominent local judge set his fork down on his porcelain plate. The loud clank of the metal echoed in the quiet yard. A third woman, sitting near the buffet line, actually covered her mouth with her hand. She looked visibly sick. Beverly's country club friends were ruthless gossips, but they operated strictly behind closed doors. They destroyed reputations in private whispers. They did not scream about empty bodies and failed pregnancies into a microphone at an anniversary gala. Beverly had miscalculated her audience. In her desperate rush to break my spirit and elevate Harper, she had revealed her own dark psychopathy to the exact people she was trying to impress. The silence stretched on. It felt heavy and dangerous. Pastor Miller did not say a word. He slowly turned his head and looked at me. His grip on his walking cane tightened. I did not cry. I did not shrink back into my chair. The grief over my failed IVF cycles was real, but I refused to let my mother use it as a weapon against me ever again. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped harshly against the stone patio. The sound made several guests jump in their seats. I stood up. My legs felt like solid concrete. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or sadness. I was shaking from the pure, primal adrenaline coursing through my system. The blood roared in my ears. I smoothed the front of my navy blue dress. I stood tall and squared my shoulders. Every single head on the patio swiveled to look at me. 50 wealthy guests held their collective breath. They expected me to run away. They expected me to cover my face and flee the party in tears, just like the broken, defeated daughter Beverly had painted me to be. I did not move toward the driveway. I kept my eyes locked onto my mother, standing at the microphone. Her confident posture faltered for a fraction of a second. Her fingers tightened around her champagne flute. She saw the fire burning in my gaze, and for the first time in her life, she looked slightly unsure of her own dominance. I shifted my gaze toward table 1. I looked past Harper, who was still perched awkwardly on my husband's lap. I looked directly into Cole's dark eyes. The trap had snapped shut. Beverly had delivered the ultimate public insult. She had laid her cards on the table for everyone in Savannah to see. Now it was our turn to play the winning hand. The crowd waited in agonizing suspense. The thick Georgia heat felt suffocating. No one dared to take a sip of their drink or whisper a single word. They watched me standing tall in the corner, and they watched my mother gripping the microphone stand. The tension was a physical weight pressing down on the entire yard. I did not need to scream. I did not need to throw a glass or cause a chaotic scene. I just needed to hold my ground and wait for the man I married to execute the final, devastating phase of our plan. The quiet was about to break. And the words that would follow were going to wipe the smug smile off my sister's face and turn my mother's kingdom into ash. The entire patio remained completely paralyzed. My mother stood near the microphone stand with a vicious smirk still lingering on her lips. She thought she had won the ultimate prize. She fully expected me to break down crying and run away from the party in absolute shame. She wanted Cole to comfort Harper, while the wealthy country club guests pitied my fragile mental state. She had built this stage specifically to watch me crumble. Instead, I stood tall at table 5 and stared right back at her. I did not shed a single tear. I did not look away. Then, the real earthquake began. Cole did not push my sister away. He did not ask her to politely move. He simply stood up. His movement was abrupt and entirely devoid of any gentlemanly grace. Because he stood up so incredibly fast, gravity took immediate control of the situation. Harper had zero time to balance herself. She was leaning heavily against his chest, expecting him to hold her. When the support vanished, she slid straight off his dark trousers and tumbled backward. Her arms flailed wildly in the humid air. She hit the Bermuda grass hard. Her expensive white silk dress bunched up around her waist, exposing her bare thighs. She landed on her elbows with an ugly, undignified thud. Her crystal wine glass tumbled from her manicured fingers. The red liquid splashed across her pristine white skirt and spilled all over the manicured green lawn. She looked like a messy, discarded doll thrown onto the dirt. Harper gasped in utter shock. She looked up at Cole, waiting for an apology. She waited for him to reach down and help her back to her feet. She expected him to be a Southern gentleman. Cole did not even look at her. He stepped right over her tangled legs as if she were nothing more than a piece of garbage blocking his path. He calmly buttoned the center button of his navy suit jacket. His face was a mask of cold, absolute fury. The quiet, accommodating history teacher was gone. The man walking across the stone patio looked like a predator closing in on a trapped animal. He walked directly toward the microphone stand where Beverly stood frozen in place. The wealthy guests parted like the Red Sea. No one dared to step in his way. The local bank president scrambled backward, bumping into a tall floral arrangement. Uncle Robert backed into a waiter trying to clear the path. The silence in the yard was so profound, I could hear the expensive leather of Cole's shoes scraping against the stone tiles. The heavy Georgia heat felt suffocating, but a cold chill radiated from my husband. Beverly watched him approach. Her smug confidence began to fracture under his intense glare. She clutched her champagne flute tighter. She opened her mouth to speak to try and regain control of her carefully orchestrated narrative. She needed to spin the situation before it spiraled out of her hands. Cole did not give her the chance. 17 voicemails, Beverly. His voice boomed across the yard. He did not even need a microphone. His tone carried the heavy, commanding authority of a man who spent his life running football practices and demanding discipline. The words slammed into my mother like physical blows. You left nothing to chance, Cole continued. He stopped exactly 3 feet away from her. He stared down at her with absolute, unfiltered disgust. You orchestrated every single Sunday dinner. You designed every seating chart to place her next to me. You treated my marriage like a business transaction you could cancel at your own convenience. But you got arrogant. You got sloppy. You coached your daughter to chase me, but you forgot that I pay attention. I save everything. I have the timelines. I have the text messages. And I have the audio recordings. Beverly's face lost all its color. Her heavy makeup suddenly looked like a cheap mask plastered over terrified skin. She took a half step backward. Her silver heels wobbled unsteadily on the stone patio. She looked wildly at the crowd, realizing they were hanging on his every word. Cole reached inside his jacket pocket. He pulled out his smartphone. He did not just hold it up in the air. He stepped forward and snatched the microphone right out of its metal stand. Beverly was too stunned to stop him. He held his digital device directly against the black foam cover of the microphone. He tapped the screen with his thumb. A loud, sharp beep echoed through the outdoor speakers. Then a voice filled the entire Savannah estate. It was Harper's voice. But it was not the bubbly fake giggle she used for the country club crowds. It was a low, desperate, and predatory tone. It was the sound of a woman actively hunting someone else's husband. Cole, honey, the recorded voice purred through the speakers loudly. Amity works nights again tomorrow. I know she is struggling, and you must be so exhausted carrying that heavy burden. Mom says you need a real woman to come home to, someone who is not broken. I am waiting for you at my place. Just tell me when to leave the door unlocked. The audio clip ended with a sharp click. Cole lowered the phone and placed it back into his pocket. The silence that followed was absolute. It was completely deafening. The truth did not just walk into the anniversary party. It kicked the front door off the hinges and exposed every ugly, twisted lie Beverly had built her reputation upon. I watched the country club guests process the audio recording. The realization hit them in massive waves of revulsion. The woman in the pale yellow dress gasped and covered her mouth in sheer horror. The local judge shook his head, staring at the ground in pure disgust. They had just heard a sister proposition a married man while explicitly confirming that their mother orchestrated the entire seduction. They heard Harper call my medical trauma a burden. They heard her call me broken. The polished, high society image Beverly had spent 40 years cultivating disintegrated into ash in a matter of seconds. She was no longer the generous benefactor or the gracious host. She was a monster who plotted against her own child. Harper was still sitting on the grass near table 1, her face drained of all blood. She looked like a ghost trapped in the daylight. She scrambled frantically to pull her stained white dress down over her knees. She looked desperately around the yard, searching for a friendly face to rescue her. She found nothing but 50 pairs of eyes staring at her with intense judgment. No one moved to help her up. The waiters stood frozen, holding empty trays. The musicians stared in disbelief. Harper had publicly presented herself as a victim of a bad divorce. Now everyone knew she was an active predator trying to steal a stable home. I looked back at the microphone stand. Beverly was trembling violently. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at Cole. She looked at her wealthy friends turning their backs on her. She finally looked across the yard at me. I did not offer her a single ounce of pity. I stood tall in my navy gown, holding my head high. I let her feel the crushing weight of her own actions. I let her choke on the reality she had created. Beverly's fingers lost their strength entirely. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her manicured hand. It fell in slow motion. The glass hit the hard stone patio, right near Cole's leather shoes. It shattered into 100 sparkling pieces. The loud, sharp crash of the breaking crystal was the only sound in the entire yard. It was the perfect, undeniable punctuation mark to the end of her reign. Her kingdom was gone. Her power was completely broken. She had invited 50 of her most important peers to witness my destruction, and instead she had handed them front-row tickets to her own social execution. But the reckoning was far from over. Cole lowered the microphone back into the metal stand. He looked over his shoulder toward the head table. He had delivered his part of the strategy. He had exposed the seduction plot and destroyed Harper's credibility in front of the town. Now it was time to reveal the darkest, most unforgivable crime they had committed. I turned my attention to table 1. My father, Thomas, was already moving. He pushed his heavy wooden chair back. He stood up straight. For my entire life, Thomas Anderson had kept his head bowed and his voice silent. He had watched Beverly abuse me, and he had done nothing but hide in his garage. But today, the grease-stained mechanic was no longer hiding in the shadows. He reached inside the breast pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out the thick manila folder. The guests watched him with bated breath. They were already reeling from the audio recording. They had no idea that the voicemails were just the appetizer. The real horror was hiding inside that brown paper folder. The medical sabotage, the paid operative, and the calculated destruction of my unborn child were about to be dragged into the light. My father bypassed Harper sitting on the lawn. He ignored the shattered glass at Beverly's feet. He started walking directly across the patio toward me, and the contents of the folder he was carrying would ensure my mother and sister would never show their faces in this town again. My father, Thomas, stepped away from his chair at the head table. The wooden legs scraped against the stone pavers. He stood straight. His shoulders were broad beneath his inexpensive suit jacket. For 30 years, he had bowed his head to keep the peace. He had swallowed his pride while my mother paraded her wealth and status around Savannah. He let her dictate every family decision. Today, he refused to bow. He walked around the edge of table 1. He moved with a steady, deliberate pace. Beverly stood frozen near the microphone stand, staring at the shattered champagne glass resting near her silver heels. She looked up and saw her husband moving across the patio. "Thomas," she hissed. Her voice shook with panic. "Sit down right now. You are embarrassing us." My father did not even look at her. He walked right past her. He ignored the frantic wave of her hand. He ignored the 50 wealthy guests watching his every move. He crossed the manicured lawn, heading directly toward the corner where I stood. He stopped in front of table 5. He reached inside his breast pocket and pulled out the thick manila folder. The brown paper looked worn along the edges. He held it out toward me. His calloused hands were steady. He did not tremble. "Everything Amity," he said. His voice was loud enough to carry over the quiet yard. "I am done being a coward." I reached out and took the folder. The weight of the paper felt heavy in my hands. It was the physical documentation of my nightmare. It was the blueprint of their betrayal. I looked into my father's eyes. I saw deep regret mixed with fierce pride. He had finally chosen a side. He had chosen me. I turned away from the kitchen doors. I held the folder against my chest and walked toward the center of the patio. The crowd parted for me. The local bank president stepped backward into a potted fern. The woman wearing the pale yellow dress pulled her purse tight against her ribs. They looked at me like I was carrying a loaded weapon. In a way, I was. I stopped at the large buffet table set up in the middle of the yard. It was covered in expensive, catered appetizers and silver serving trays. I pushed a platter of smoked salmon aside. The metal trays screeched against the white linen tablecloth. I opened the manila folder. I pulled out the first stack of papers. These were the raw system logs from the Georgia Fertility Institute. I slammed them down onto the center of the buffet table. The loud smack echoed off the brick walls of the estate. Harper was still sitting on the grass near Cole. Her white silk dress was stained with spilled red wine. She scrambled to her knees, trying to stand up. She looked at the papers resting on the white linen. "You paid a nurse to kill my embryo, Harper?" I said. My voice did not shake. The words cut through the humid air, sharp and precise. Harper froze. Her eyes went wide. She shook her head side to side. Her mouth opened, but she could not form a single syllable. I pointed at the printed logs. "You paid your college roommate Renee to tamper with my medical procedure," I continued. I made sure my voice projected so every single guest could hear the clinical reality of her crime. "While the doctor stepped out of the sterile suite, your friend diluted the culture medium holding my unborn child. She added sterile saline to weaken the cells. You orchestrated a silent death so you could convince my husband that I was broken." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The sheer depravity of the accusation was too much for the country club peers to process. They were accustomed to financial scandals and petty neighborhood gossip. They were not prepared for calculated biological sabotage. I reached into the folder again. I pulled out the second stack of papers, held together by silver binder clips. These were the 14 email threads Thomas had forwarded from Beverly's digital tablet. I tossed them onto the table, right next to the clinic logs. "And you," I said, turning my gaze toward my mother, "you emailed a high-profile divorce attorney in Atlanta 14 times. You mapped out my financial ruin. You asked the senior partner how fast a judge could finalize a separation if my husband were seduced by his own sister-in-law. You planned to strip me of my home and hand my life over to your favorite daughter. You wanted it all wrapped up in a neat little bow before this anniversary party." Beverly shook her head. Her perfectly styled hair fell out of place. "Amity, you are hysterical," she stammered. Her voice was shrill and desperate. "You are having a mental breakdown. Those papers are fake. They have digital timestamps, Mom," I replied. "The fertility logs have security badge numbers. Your emails have tracking headers. You cannot lie your way out of a paper trail." I looked past my mother. I looked at the audience she had invited to witness my destruction. Pastor Miller stood up from table 5. His wooden walking cane clattered against the stone pavers. His face was pale. The kind, sympathetic eyes I had known since childhood were filled with unadulterated horror. He looked at Beverly as if she were a stranger. He had spent years accepting her financial donations to his church. He suddenly realized the dark, twisted nature of the woman funding his choir. "May God have mercy on your soul, Beverly," the old pastor whispered. He turned his back on her. He did not say another word. He began walking slowly toward the front driveway. His departure broke the invisible seal holding the guests in place. The moral authority of the town had just rendered his silent verdict. The country club friends realized the severe danger of remaining on that patio. If they stayed, they would be forever associated with a family that tampered with human embryos and plotted hostile takeovers of marriages. In their fragile social ecosystem, proximity to a scandal was just as damaging as committing the crime. Panic rippled through the crowd. The woman in the pale yellow dress grabbed her husband's arm and practically dragged him toward the side gate. The bank president turned on his heel and marched toward his parked car without looking back. Uncle Robert shoved his hands into his pockets and walked away with his head hung low. Guests began grabbing their expensive purses from the backs of their chairs. They abandoned their half-empty wine glasses on the cocktail tables. The rapid sound of high heels clicking against the stone tiles filled the air. No one offered their goodbyes. No one thanked Beverly for the catered food. They fled the scene as fast as their legs could carry them. The mass exodus was brutal and efficient. The stage Beverly built to elevate her golden child was crumbling into dust before her very eyes. Beverly realized her social empire was evaporating. She saw the bank president driving away. She saw her reputation sinking into an abyss she could never climb out of. The panic overwhelmed her calculated restraint. She lunged forward. She reached across the space separating us. Her manicured fingers dug into my bare forearm. Her nails bit into my skin. "Stop them," she hissed. Her eyes were wild and frantic. "Tell them you made a mistake, Amity. Tell them you are confused from your medical treatments. You are ruining my life. You are ruining your sister." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. I felt a surge of disgust. For 33 years, I had let this woman dictate my worth. I had allowed her to make me feel small. I had absorbed her insults to keep the peace. But the peace was always a lie. I jerked my arm backward. Her grip broke. She stumbled forward, almost tripping over the hem of her silver gown. I stepped back. I created a physical boundary she would never cross again. "Do not ever speak my name again," I told her. The sentence hung in the humid air. It was a final, irrevocable decree. I severed the tie binding us together. She was no longer my mother. She was just a desperate, lonely woman standing in a ruined yard. Cole appeared at my side. He did not say a word to Beverly. He did not glance at Harper, who was still crying on the grass. He reached out and wrapped his large, warm hand around my fingers. His grip was firm and steady. He pulled me close to his side. We turned our backs on the wreckage. We walked across the patio together. We stepped off the stone pavers and walked down the long, paved driveway. The sound of car engines starting up echoed down the street as the last remaining guests fled the neighborhood. We did not look over our shoulders. We left my mother and sister standing in a graveyard of their own making. We reached our vehicles. Cole opened the passenger door of his dark gray truck for me. I climbed inside. The leather seat felt cool against my skin. He shut the door and walked around to the driver's side. He started the engine and put the truck into gear. As we drove away from the estate, I watched the sprawling house fade in the side mirror. The suffocating weight I had carried in my chest for 6 months was gone. The truth had finally won. But the fallout from that afternoon was going to reshape the rest of our lives. The undeniable proof we dropped on that buffet table would trigger a series of legal and professional consequences that Beverly and Harper could never escape. And amidst the ashes of their destruction, my father was about to deliver one final surprise that would heal the deepest wound in my heart. Monday morning arrived with a clear blue sky. I did not put on my nursing scrubs. I did not go to the hospital. I drove my car straight to the state capitol building in Atlanta. I carried the heavy manila folder containing the raw system logs, the security timestamps, and a sworn affidavit from the clinic data director. I walked into the main office of the Georgia Medical Board. I sat across a long mahogany table from a lead investigator. I laid out the precise timeline of the biological tampering. The investigator did not interrupt me. He reviewed the documentation proving that a licensed professional intentionally diluted a culture medium to destroy a viable embryo. The medical board moved with a swift, ruthless efficiency I had never witnessed before. They dispatched officers to the clinic that very afternoon. They confiscated computers and suspended the nursing license pending an emergency formal hearing. By the end of the month, the revocation became permanent and public. Renee was legally barred from stepping foot inside any healthcare facility in the state of Georgia. She faced a looming criminal investigation for medical fraud and gross negligence. She tried to call my cell phone once. She left a sobbing voicemail begging for mercy, claiming she was manipulated by my family. I deleted the message and blocked her number. She traded her career and her morality for a quick payout. She lost everything. My sister faced a different breed of justice. The audio recording Cole played at the anniversary party did not remain confined to that stone patio. Savannah operates like a small town when a major scandal breaks. The gossip spread through text messages and hushed phone calls before the sun even set. Word reached her ex-husband within 24 hours. He was a decent man who had grown tired of her endless vanity. When he heard the rumors about her plotting to seduce a married man, he immediately contacted his lawyer. He filed an emergency motion in the county family court. During the hearing, his attorney subpoenaed the voicemails Cole had saved on his phone. I sat in the back row of the cold wooden courtroom and watched the judge listen to the audio playback. The judge heard Harper call my medical trauma a heavy burden. The judge heard her eagerly plot to destroy a stable home. The gavel came down hard. The court ruled that Harper exhibited severe psychological instability and a profound lack of moral judgment. Her ex-husband was granted full primary physical custody of their 2 young boys. Harper was stripped of her maternal rights and reduced to supervised weekend visits at a designated public facility. The financial reality hit her next. Without Beverly funding her extravagant lifestyle, Harper could not afford her luxury vehicle or her high-end apartment. She was forced to pack her designer clothes into cardboard boxes and move into a cheap, cramped unit across town. She faded into total obscurity. The golden child was stripped of her gold. Beverly suffered the exact fate she feared the most: public humiliation. On Tuesday morning, the country club board of directors held an emergency closed-door meeting. The bank president who fled our party spearheaded the unanimous vote. They sent a private courier to my mother's sprawling estate. The courier delivered a formal letter requesting her immediate, permanent resignation from all social committees. Pastor Miller took similar decisive action. He returned Beverly's latest financial donation via certified mail. He included a short, handwritten note stating that the church could not accept money built on the suffering of an innocent child. Beverly became universally shunned. She tried to walk through the local upscale grocery store, and former friends literally turned their shopping carts around to avoid making eye contact. She was excommunicated from polite society. But her greatest loss happened inside her own walls. The morning after the party, my father packed his belongings into 2 heavy canvas duffel bags. Thomas did not ask for a negotiation. He did not raise his voice. He handed Beverly a printed set of divorce papers he had quietly drafted with his own lawyer weeks in advance. He walked out the front door and left the sprawling estate behind. He rented a small, peaceful cottage near a quiet fishing lake. He spends his days restoring vintage engines in his new garage and drinking black coffee on his wooden front porch. He is a man completely reborn. Beverly was left entirely alone. She lives in a silent, empty mansion. There are no catered dinner parties. There are no seating charts to arrange. She sits in her expensive living room surrounded by imported furniture that cannot buy her a single visitor. She built a kingdom based on appearances, and now she reigns over a kingdom of ghosts. 6 months passed. The crisp autumn breeze swept away the oppressive summer heat. Cole and I spent our weekends navigating a grueling application process. We opened our home to the state adoption agency. We passed every extensive background check and completed every psychological interview. We built a room filled with hope instead of grief. On a quiet Tuesday morning, my phone rang. It was our dedicated caseworker. She had a file on her desk. She had a match. We drove to the county office with tears streaming down our faces and signed the final placement papers. That evening, Cole and I stood in the doorway of our nursery. The room smelled of lavender baby lotion and fresh laundry. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a warm, golden glow across the hardwood floor. In the corner of the room sat the handcrafted oak bassinet my father had built in his garage. It was no longer empty. A beautiful baby girl slept soundly on the soft mattress. She had dark hair and tiny, perfect fingers. Her chest rose and fell in a steady, peaceful rhythm. My father, Thomas, sat in a rocking chair near the window, watching his new granddaughter sleep. He smiled a genuine, bright smile. Cole wrapped his strong arm around my waist and pulled me close. I rested my head against his shoulder. We had survived the darkest storm imaginable. My body had not failed me. It simply redirected me to the child I was always destined to raise. My mother spent her entire life teaching me that my value depended on what I could produce for her image. She tried to erase my marriage because I did not fit her perfect narrative. She tried to convince me that I was hollow and defective. But standing in this nursery looking at my daughter, I know the absolute truth. An empty womb does not dictate an empty life. Love without boundaries is just an open door for toxic people to walk through and steal your joy. You have the fundamental right to close that door. You have the right to build a new table and leave the empty chairs far behind you. If you are fighting a desperate battle against the people who are supposed to protect you, remember this crucial lesson. silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's just the time it takes to gather your receipts. Keep building your case. Keep protecting your peace. Your vindication is coming. Thank you for listening to Grape Vengeance. If my journey brought you comfort today, please leave a comment below. Stay strong, and I will see you in the next story.